The scent of mothballs in the old trunk still makes my stomach clench. That trunk, sitting empty in Alara's hallway, was the first sign that this was no longer a marriage ending, but a war starting. Before I dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you enjoy stories like this, please like and subscribe. It helps me keep sharing more. Alara walked in from the solicitor's meeting, her face a mask, and told me Alistair had filed the motion not just for the house but for every last item of sentimental value. Specifically, the vintage clock collection I'd promised her, the one he'd always mocked. I looked at her, and the sight of her jaw, set hard against tears, was worse than any crying fit could have been. That's when the betrayal truly hit me. How could someone vow to love you forever, and then try to dismantle every piece of your history? The legal maneuvers were cruel enough, trying to freeze her accounts, filing frivolous demands, but this felt personal. It was Alistair's way of saying, "I want to erase you." We had tried to keep things civil for a few weeks, believing we could work it out like adults, but he made it impossible. He even sent a smug, clipped email to Alara saying the collection was being sold to cover immediate legal costs. The arrogance, the audacity. It was an intentional humiliation, designed to break her spirit before the court date even arrived. What would you have done if your own son-in-law had sold your daughter's heirlooms right out from under her? I told Alara to save her strength, but inside, I was shaking with a quiet dread that settled deep in my chest. I knew then I couldn't just stand on the sidelines. Later that evening, the tension in the house was so thick I could almost see it shimmer. I reached into Alara's discarded document pile, just to tidy up, and my fingers brushed against a folded piece of thick, expensive cardstock. It wasn't a court filing. It was a wedding invitation from Alistair's cousin, dated 2 months from now, and the RSVP note fluttered to the floor. It proved he was already planning his future, a future that excluded my daughter entirely, using the money he hadn't even won yet. He was ready to settle down with someone else, but he needed Alara's money to pay for it. This wasn't just a divorce. It was a carefully calculated theft. I stood there, the cardstock rough in my hand, thinking, he's not just mocking her, he's celebrating his win before the fight is over. What was this man hiding in plain sight? And how could I use this secret to break his case apart before Alara lost everything? The RSVP card was more than just a date. It was a blueprint for betrayal. I immediately called Lucas, my son, and explained the situation with the card. His silence on the phone was too long, too loud. It was the crushing sound of a secret being held too long. Finally, his voice, usually so steady and booming, broke when he admitted the truth. Alistair hadn't just moved on. He'd been given a massive zero-interest loan from his mother, Beatrice, contingent on Alara being cut off entirely from the communal funds. A preemptive strike. Lucas had known for months, sworn to secrecy, and the regret of keeping that from Alara now weighed him down. His broken voice whispering, "I'm so sorry, Dad," was the worst sound I'd heard all year. My own grief wasn't for the lost marriage, but for the years Alara had wasted. I had misjudged Alistair completely, blinded by his smooth corporate confidence, and that failure was mine. I should have seen the coldness in his eyes. I should have warned her. The only sound in my small apartment now was the low, grinding hum of the refrigerator, a monotonous domestic sound that felt wrong while Alara's life shattered just down the hall. I needed to know the depths of Alistair's cruelty. I accessed Alara's old laptop, tracing the communication trail before the divorce went official. What I found was a hidden group chat titled "The Great Escape" between Alistair and his arrogant family. They weren't just strategizing their asset grab, they were actively mocking Alara's attempts to start a small, sustainable clothing business, calling it Grandpa's Little Lemonade Stand. This wasn't about money anymore. It was calculated humiliation meant to destroy her confidence entirely, performed for an audience. Do you think I was too forgiving here just watching him chip away at her future like this? They were planning a lavish celebratory dinner the night after the final court hearing, confident in their victory. But the truly chilling part was the last message. It came from Alistair's mother, Beatrice. And it wasn't about money or houses. It was a single, clear, cold sentence regarding Alara's father, my best friend, who had passed 2 years prior. Make sure she knows who the superior family is now that her old man isn't here to protect her. This wasn't just divorce. It was a targeted strike at Alara's deepest pain and grief. That sentence changed my mission entirely. I knew then that Alistair's objective was to erase my daughter, and I had to respond in kind. How could I possibly stand by and let this arrogant family desecrate the memory of my best friend and humiliate my daughter? I remember standing in Alara's kitchen 6 months ago, tightening a loose cabinet handle. A tiny domestic flaw I fixed in seconds. Now the whole foundation of her life felt loose, shaking, and the fix wasn't a screwdriver. It was a legal sledgehammer. That morning, a damp chill seemed to cling to everything, making the brass doorknob of Cassandra's law office feel icy under my touch. The quiet dread of being unable to protect my daughter was a bitter taste in my mouth, but it fueled my resolve. Alistair and Beatrice had miscalculated. Their cruelty, aimed at Alara's father, had only succeeded in recruiting a ghost into the battle, my best friend. Cassandra, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney, spread the documents out, the cheap legal paper surprisingly cold against the mahogany desk. She confirmed my fear. Alistair's case was airtight, built entirely on obfuscation and delaying tactics. He was simply trying to exhaust Alara financially and emotionally until she gave up. "They've buried her," Cassandra sighed, tapping a long finger on a particularly dense paragraph. "The only way to unbury her is to make them regret digging in the first place." I agreed. This wasn't about winning. It was about destroying the why, destroying the arrogant satisfaction they took in her suffering. My plan was simple, risky, and needed absolute precision. I had spent days tracking a specific real estate transaction involving Beatrice's name and a property that should have been sold years ago. If they were planning a great escape, they had to have a safe house, and rich people always leave a paper trail. What if the money they used to fund Alistair's zero-interest loan wasn't theirs to begin with? My hands felt rough and strangely large as I gripped the armrests of the chair, running through the possibilities. It was a physical feeling, the touch of the fight settling into my bones. As I left Cassandra's office, the tension in my neck was so severe, it gave me a dull headache. I stepped out onto the polished granite steps, pulling my coat collar up against the morning air, and stopped dead. Across the busy street, leaning against a dark sedan with a look of bored calculation, was Beatrice, Alistair's mother. She was far from her usual suburban haunts. Her eyes, magnified slightly by her expensive glasses, tracked me instantly. It was a brief, cold moment of recognition, a silent acknowledgement of the war between us. She wasn't just in town, she was waiting for me. Had they anticipated I would fight back, and was she there to deliver a warning, or was she just a terrifying premonition of what was coming next? I still remember the scent of expensive bourbon and leather in Beatrice's drawing room years ago. It was Thanksgiving. She had raised her glass to me, praising my daughter Alara for being such a grounding force in Alistair's life. That memory, once warm, now felt like acid. I stood on the street corner, the adrenaline leaving a bitter, metallic taste on my tongue after our silent confrontation. Her eyes hadn't held malice. They held a dangerous calculation. It was the moment I realized the entire family had seen Alara not as a wife, but as an asset to be leveraged and then discarded. I hurried back to the car and immediately called Liam, my financial contact, feeding him the property address and Beatrice's entity names. Liam, a specialist in untangling corporate shells, promised to call back within the hour. The waiting was agony. I felt a rising, nauseating shock at the hidden truth I suspected lay buried beneath the paperwork, that Alistair's cruelty was enabled by deep-rooted long-term financial deception. Have you ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted, only to realize their entire life was a lie? When Liam finally called, his voice was tight. "William, this isn't just a loan. That property was never legally Beatrice's to leverage. It belongs to a foundation set up to benefit Alistair's deceased aunt. He paused, the digital delay making the line hiss. This isn't financial maneuvering, it's outright fraud. And the loan she gave Alistair? It's the foundation's money. They aren't just taking Alara's assets, they're risking serious jail time for a few $100,000. The sheer stupidity of the risk hit me harder than the malice. They were so arrogant in their small-time cruelty that they exposed themselves to catastrophic legal failure. This new information, the misuse of charity funds, was the legal equivalent of a tactical nuclear weapon. I knew I couldn't share it electronically. I started the car, needing to meet Cassandra immediately. As I reversed, a massive black SUV, completely unmarked, pulled sharply out of the shadow of a nearby bridge abutment. It cut across 2 lanes, blocking the exit ramp. The windows were tinted dark, and I couldn't see the driver. My heart hammered against my ribs, suddenly realizing that Beatrice hadn't been waiting to warn me. She was waiting to see if I was a threat. Was this intimidation, or was I about to face a direct physical challenge for what I now knew? The massive black SUV was a wall of polished steel, completely obscuring the road. I slammed the brakes, the small rental car shuddering beneath me. My immediate sight was drawn to the driver's side window, which began to glide down slowly, revealing not a hired goon, but Alistair's cousin, a hulking man named Derek, wearing a sickeningly familiar smirk. It was a shocking revelation that their carefully structured betrayal now involved family muscle. Derek didn't need to speak. The simple visual of his bulk filling the window was a clear threat. "Going somewhere, Grandpa?" His voice was a flat growl, devoid of any genuine emotion, which only heightened my betrayal that family, even extended, could sink this low for money. "Beatrice just wanted me to relay a message. She says to stick to knitting and leave the adult business to the adults. You're starting to cause problems, and we don't like problems." The air in the car suddenly felt thin, tasting faintly of ozone and fear. I looked directly into his eyes, cold, dead windows that confirmed he was willing to go far beyond a simple warning. What would you have done when faced with this kind of physical threat, knowing the other side was willing to use family against you? I kept my hands visible on the steering wheel. I knew calling the police would only slow me down and potentially allow them to confiscate the evidence I had. I put the car in drive, then immediately cranked the wheel and accelerated into the small gap between the SUV's fender and the concrete barrier. The sickening screech of rubber on pavement filled the small space, and the driver's side mirror of the SUV exploded inward as I scraped past. It was a risky, aggressive move, but Derek was too slow, too complacent in his physical dominance to react. I sped away, adrenaline masking the sharp sting of the realization. They weren't worried about the financial fraud. They were worried I knew where to look. I reached Cassandra's office, my hands shaking as I handed her the complete dossier on Beatrice's foundation fraud. Her eyes widened as she scanned the documents. "William, this changes everything. This isn't a divorce case anymore. It's criminal. Alistair's mockery ends tomorrow." Finally, a sense of relief mixed with the exhaustion. But that calm lasted only until I checked my phone. I had a text from Alara, my daughter, sent 5 minutes earlier. It was brief, cold, and devastating. "Dad, stop interfering. Alistair told me what you're trying to do. You're just making it worse. Stay home tomorrow. I don't want you there." The final chilling wave of betrayal wasn't from Alistair or Beatrice, but from the person I was fighting for. Who else had Alistair turned against me, and how could I possibly face him in court, knowing my own daughter hated my intervention? Ilara's text, "Stay home tomorrow," was a punch that left no bruise, only a hollow sound echoing the vast empty space where trust used to be. The family betrayal revealed immediately in that message was worse than any financial fraud. Alistair hadn't just stolen her money, he had poisoned her view of me. It was the ultimate insidious victory for him. I stared at the screen, and the shock at the hidden truth solidified. I was entirely alone in this fight, and the person I was fighting for now saw me as the enemy. This forced me to change my final personal strategy. Before I dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, please like and subscribe. It helps me keep sharing more. I spent the next few hours in my study, the air thick with the smell of old paper. I wasn't reviewing Cassandra's notes. I was reviewing a document much older and far more personal. It was a letter, dated the week before my wife passed. A quiet instruction, a promise made between two people about what to do if. It was the insurance policy against Alistair's exact brand of calculated, opportunistic cruelty. I carefully tucked the brittle yellowed paper into the inside pocket of my jacket. This was my hidden weapon, one that could only be deployed at the very end. The next morning, the courthouse was a tomb of polished marble and hushed conversations. The sound of my leather shoes clicking on the floor tiles was unnaturally loud, each step a declaration of defiance. I arrived early, finding a secluded bench in a deserted hallway just outside courtroom 3. The silence was absolute, a perfect canvas for the quiet dread I was trying to suppress. I closed my eyes and focused on the simple, rough touch of the wool jacket, a small comfort. I thought about Alara, who was undoubtedly waking up believing I'd abandoned her fight, believing her husband's lies. Do you think I was too forgiving of Alara's harsh words? Or should a parent always forgive a child blinded by manipulation? I heard the distant voices of Alistair and Beatrice approaching before I saw them. They were laughing, a bright, grating sound that seemed entirely out of place in that somber building. They turned the corner, looking self-satisfied and relaxed, clearly expecting Alara to be alone, easily defeated. Alistair, noticing my presence, froze instantly. His laughter died in his throat. He regained his composure quickly, but his eyes narrowed with intense, undisguised hatred. Beatrice smiled, a terrifying, predatory smile. Alistair turned to whisper something to his mother, his confidence absolute. He truly believed he had won. He truly believed the only weapon I had was the legal paperwork Cassandra held. But he was about to discover the one piece of evidence he had entirely forgotten existed, the one thing that turned him from a cruel man into a desperate fool. What deeply hidden truth, tied to a dead woman's final instruction, was Alistair about to face that would change his arrogant smirk to cold terror? Alistair and Beatrice settled into the front row, radiating confidence. I waited outside courtroom 3, the air growing thick with the scent of old wood and varnish. When the bailiff opened the doors, I entered last and took a seat far in the back, a ghost in the periphery. This was their arena, and I was giving them the space to be exactly who they were. The room fell into a polite hum of anticipation, but I noticed Alara was not yet present. This gave Alistair exactly the opening he needed. The hearing began with Alistair's attorney presenting their fabricated defense, casually dismissing Alara's financial claims. I kept my gaze fixed on the back of Alistair's neck. As his lawyer finished, Alistair turned to his mother, Beatrice, flashing a quick, arrogant smile. He then turned fully around, scanning the room. His eyes found me, sitting alone in the last row. This was the moment of his cruelest, most unearned victory, a family betrayal revealed immediately to the entire courtroom. He leaned slightly toward his attorney, but his voice carried clearly, loud enough to pierce the polite quiet. Your Honor, before we proceed, I just want to note that even my own former father-in-law, William here, seems to have abandoned this ridiculous attempt at litigation. He's sitting back there, probably wishing he had stayed home like my wife suggested. He let out a soft, theatrical chuckle, and Beatrice mirrored it, a dry, grating sound that meant they had truly won. Do you think I was right to let him think he had won in that moment? Or should I have interrupted his mockery right then? Alistair looked directly at me, the contempt pouring off his face, completely dismissing my presence, treating me like a defeated old fool. This was the betrayal that tipped the scales. Not the money, but the public, casual humiliation of my daughter's father. I felt the rough touch of the letter in my pocket, the quiet intensity of my plan firming in my chest. Alistair was so focused on basking in his moment of mockery that he never noticed the courtroom door gently swing open behind him. Judge Elias, a man known for his rigid, quiet demeanor, was listening to Alistair's attorney reply, nodding slightly. Then, the judge's eyes lifted past the defense table, focusing on the figure that had just entered the room, a woman in a severe black suit carrying a heavy leather briefcase. She walked with the deliberate, measured pace of someone with authority. The moment the judge saw her, his entire body stiffened, his professional mask fractured. He stopped the attorney mid-sentence, his voice dropping to a shocked, barely audible whisper. "Why are you here?" The room went completely silent as Alistair, Beatrice, and her arrogant family looked at each other in panic. Who was this unexpected person who commanded the judge's absolute attention, and why did her presence terrify Alistair and his mother instantly? The judge's whisper felt less like a question and more like a warning. The woman who had entered, Ms. Alana, was a long hidden secret surfacing suddenly, a figure of professional consequence. And she didn't answer him directly. She walked past the defense table, ignoring Alistair's paralyzed sight of her, and laid her heavy leather briefcase down on Cassandra's table. Alistair's arrogance was instantly replaced by a deep, guttural, quiet dread. He understood the moment his lawyer's face went chalk white. This wasn't a standard divorce proceeding anymore. This was a formal intervention. "Your Honor," Ms. Alana said, her voice clear and without inflection, dominating the room's absolute silence. "I apologize for the intrusion, but my presence is mandatory. I am with the Department of Justice, and we received a fully documented, time-sensitive referral this morning concerning the defendant's use of the Elias Foundation, a tax-exempt charitable entity, for systematic fraud." The judge, now composed, merely gave a solemn nod. The courtroom felt intensely cold, and I could practically taste the metallic, dry panic radiating from Beatrice and Alistair as the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. My hands, gripping the armrests, felt the rough touch of the old oak, anchoring me as the storm broke. Alistair was not being sued for divorce anymore. He was being investigated for embezzlement. Do you think Alistair knew he was stepping into a trap, or did he genuinely believe his arrogance would save him even in that moment? The scream Alistair delivered at Alara, that desperate, panicked sound of total self-interest, finally tore the last blinders from my daughter's eyes. She stood frozen, the awful sight of her husband's monstrous fury the final, irrefutable evidence. He truly ruined everything she was. "Alana," the prosecutor stepped forward, ready to present the foundation fraud evidence, but Judge Elias held up a single hand, stopping the proceedings. This was the end of the line. The family betrayal revealed immediately to everyone, including Alara. I stood up from my seat in the back row. Every pair of eyes, the judge's, Alara's, Alistair's, and the terrified ones of Beatrice, swiveled to me. I walked slowly, deliberately, past the defense table where Alistair now sat, pale and sweating. He started to protest. "Your Honor, this man is disrupting proceedings." I reached Cassandra's table, ignoring him completely. I pulled the brittle, yellowed letter from my inner pocket, the quiet instruction my wife left me, and held it out to the bailiff. "I am sorry to interrupt, Your Honor. Alistair is correct. I was asked to stay home. But this document, dated 5 years ago, is required for the record. It directly addresses the Elias Foundation, which was co-founded by my late wife and a close friend." The judge's eyes were fixed on the envelope. He knew the handwriting. "Enter it into evidence, Mr. William," the judge commanded, his voice now firm, authoritative, and heavy with regret and grief for an old friend. He quickly read the contents. The shock from the title, the judge's whispering, "Why are you here?" was fully explained. The letter wasn't just evidence, it was my wife's final will, instructing me to release the Foundation's accounting ledger only if Alistair initiated divorce proceedings, ensuring that the criminal fraud would be exposed by the DOJ, Ms. Alana. The judge's shock was because he knew I had just activated the last line of defense his friend had built. Alistair looked at his mother, Beatrice, the sight of their simultaneous absolute defeat a cold pleasure to witness. He hadn't noticed my wife made the judge the co-executor of the foundation's oversight. I had just provided the final, unassailable piece of evidence needed to confirm the transfer of funds and Alistair's culpability. The courtroom was silent as Ms. Alana confirmed the arrest warrant was already prepared. Ilara ran across the room, collapsing into my arms, the only safe harbor left. The silence was finally broken by the sound of handcuffs clicking shut. I never said a word to Alistair. I didn't need to. He saw the full circle of my protection, a father's promise kept, and his wife's long game finally executed. That quiet promise showed me that the greatest acts of protection aren't shouted. They are planned with calm, cold precision, and executed with absolute truth. Never confuse silence with defeat. Sometimes the loudest action is simply showing up with the right piece of paper. If you're still not subscribing after seeing how that whole story unfolded, drop a comment. What's holding you back from ensuring you don't miss the next truth bomb?